The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the air in my parents' backyard on that humid Saturday afternoon in July. 28 family members had gathered for our annual summer cookout, and I was standing at the grill in my usual position, quietly flipping burgers and hot dogs while everyone else socialized around the pool and patio furniture. At 31, I'd become the designated grill master for these events, partly because I was good at it, but mostly because it kept me occupied and away from the center of family drama. My brother Marcus, 34 and eternally optimistic about his next big business venture, was holding court near the pool with his usual audience of admiring cousins and uncles. He stood there in his expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses, gesturing dramatically with a beer in his hand as he explained his latest entrepreneurial breakthrough to anyone within earshot. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying across the yard with the confident tone he'd perfected during his brief stint selling luxury cars before that venture collapsed. "Food truck businesses are absolutely exploding right now. Everyone wants artisanal street food, and the overhead is minimal compared to traditional restaurants. I'm talking about pure profit margins." Uncle Steve, who owned a moderately successful plumbing business, nodded approvingly from his lawn chair. "Smart thinking, Marcus. Mobile businesses have real advantages in this economy. Lower rent, flexible locations, direct customer interaction." My cousin Jake, fresh out of college with a business degree and no real-world experience, leaned forward with obvious excitement. "That's brilliant, man. Food trucks can make serious money at festivals and downtown lunch spots. What kind of concept are you thinking?" Marcus took a long swig of his beer and smiled like someone who'd figured out a secret that nobody else understood. "Gourmet grilled cheese and Kraft soup combinations. Comfort food with a premium twist. Think truffle mac and cheese grilled sandwiches paired with roasted tomato bisque. The profit margins on cheese and bread are incredible, and people will pay $15 for the right presentation." The group murmured appreciation for his business acumen and creative vision. My Aunt Carol, who managed a successful boutique clothing store, actually clapped her hands together with enthusiasm. "Oh Marcus, that sounds absolutely delicious and marketable. Have you secured financing yet?" That's when Marcus's smile shifted into something more mischievous and self-satisfied. He glanced over toward me at the grill, and I could see the familiar expression that meant he was about to reveal something he considered particularly clever. "Actually, I've already handled the financing," he announced with obvious pride. "Got approved for a $75,000 small business loan just this week. The bank was incredibly impressed with my credit profile and financial stability." I continued turning the burgers methodically, keeping my expression neutral and my movements calm. Something in Marcus's tone suggested there was more to this story, and experience had taught me that patience usually revealed the full picture without any prompting from me. Cousin Jennifer, who worked as a loan officer at a regional bank, looked genuinely impressed. $75,000 for a startup food truck business? That's substantial funding. Your credit score must be exceptional to qualify for that kind of unsecured business loan. Marcus practically preened under the attention and admiration. "Well, let's just say I've been very strategic about building the right financial profile for this opportunity." The way he said strategic sent a small warning signal through my mind, but I continued grilling and listening without any visible reaction. In my work as a senior financial crimes analyst at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, I'd learned to recognize the subtle verbal patterns that often preceded admissions of financial fraud or identity manipulation. "Strategic how?" asked my cousin David, who worked in mortgage lending and understood the complexities of business loan approvals. "Banks are pretty strict about small business lending these days. They want to see established income, business experience, and solid credit history." Marcus's grin widened, and he looked around the group like he was about to share the punchline of a particularly good joke. "Let's just say I borrowed some information from someone with better financial credentials than my own current situation might reflect." The group laughed appreciatively, assuming he meant he'd gotten advice from a financial consultant or used someone else's business plan as a template. They had no way of knowing that borrowed information in the context of loan applications typically meant identity theft and federal crimes. "Come on, Marcus," Jake pressed with obvious curiosity. "Give us the details. How did you pull off such a great loan approval?" Marcus took another drink and gestured toward me with his beer bottle. Well, since you're all asking, I borrowed my dear brother's identity information for the loan application. Used his social security number, employment history and credit profile. Turns out Kevin's got fantastic credit and a much better debt-to-income ratio than I realized. The admission hung in the air for a moment before the family erupted in laughter and approval. Uncle Steve slapped his knee with amusement. That's brilliant. Keep it in the family. Aunt Carol nodded with obvious admiration for Marcus's resourcefulness. Smart thinking. Why let good credit go to waste when family can benefit from it? Cousin Jennifer, despite her professional banking experience, smiled approvingly. As long as Kevin doesn't mind, that's actually pretty clever. Family helping family with financial opportunities. My father, grilling corn on the cob next to my station, chuckled and shook his head with fond exasperation. That's our Marcus, always finding creative solutions to business challenges. I continued flipping burgers and arranging them on the serving platter, maintaining the same peaceful expression I'd worn throughout the conversation. The family interpreted my calm silence as either tacit approval or simple disinterest in Marcus's business ventures, which were admittedly frequent and often short-lived. What they didn't know was that identity theft involving federal employees with security clearances triggers automatic investigation protocols within hours of detection. My position at FinCEN required comprehensive monitoring of my personal financial activities, and any unauthorized use of my identity information would be flagged immediately by federal security systems designed to detect potential compromises of sensitive personnel. Marcus had just admitted to committing aggravated identity theft, wire fraud and bank fraud in front of 28 witnesses, using the personal information of someone whose identity was protected under federal security monitoring protocols. The loan application would have been processed through banking systems that automatically cross-reference applicant information with federal databases, including security clearance holders and sensitive government employees. The best part, Marcus continued, warming to his audience's enthusiasm, is that Kevin's employment with the Treasury Department made the whole application process incredibly smooth. Banks love lending to government employees because of the job security and steady income. I barely had to provide any additional documentation. More laughter and approval from the family. My mother, who was arranging potato salad on the buffet table, looked over at both of us with obvious maternal pride. It's so wonderful when brothers help each other succeed. Kevin's always been so stable and responsible, and Marcus has such entrepreneurial vision. This is exactly how families should work together. The irony was almost overwhelming. My stable government job wasn't just employment with the Treasury Department, it was a senior analyst position with FinCEN investigating exactly the types of financial crimes that Marcus had just committed. My security clearance required continuous monitoring of my financial activities specifically to prevent the kind of identity compromise he was describing so proudly. "When do you take delivery of the food truck?" asked Uncle Steve, clearly invested in Marcus's success story. "Next week," Marcus replied with obvious satisfaction. Already got permits approved for 3 downtown locations and a catering contract with the university for their summer event series. This business is going to be generating serious cash flow within 60 days. Cousin David raised his beer bottle in a toast. Here's to Marcus and his gourmet grilled cheese empire. And to Kevin for being a good brother and sharing the wealth. Everyone joined the toast, including several family members who had walked over from other conversations to hear about Marcus's exciting new venture. I was surrounded by relatives celebrating what they saw as clever family cooperation and entrepreneurial success, completely unaware they were applauding multiple federal crimes. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus continued receiving congratulations and business advice from various family members. He explained his marketing strategy, described his planned menu offerings, and shared his projections for expansion into catering and event services. The food truck loan had apparently given him access to additional credit lines for equipment and inventory, all approved based on my identity and employment information. By evening, as we were cleaning up the barbecue and packing leftover food, Marcus pulled me aside near the garage where we'd stored extra chairs and coolers. He was slightly drunk from celebrating, and his earlier bravado had shifted into something more genuinely grateful and brotherly. "Kevin, I know I should have asked before using your information for the loan application," he said, attempting a serious tone despite his obvious intoxication. But I knew you'd probably overthink it and worry about all kinds of complications that would never actually happen. I continued stacking plastic chairs and nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you put a lot of thought into the decision, Marcus. He seemed relieved by my calm response and lack of anger or accusation. Exactly. This is really a win-win situation for both of us. The business is going to be incredibly successful and I'll pay off the loan ahead of schedule. Your credit score will actually improve from the positive payment history. Plus, family should help family when opportunities arise. I loaded the last of the chairs into the garage and turned to face him directly. I hope everything works out exactly as planned, Marcus. Monday morning arrived with typical Washington, D.C. humidity and the familiar routine of commuting to the Treasury building for another week of analyzing financial crime patterns. I was at my desk by 7:45 a.m., reviewing suspicious activity reports from banks across the Southeast region that showed potential structuring patterns designed to evade federal reporting requirements. My secure workstation provided access to multiple federal databases used to track financial crimes, money laundering operations and identity theft schemes. As a senior analyst with top-secret clearance, I regularly coordinated with FBI financial crimes units, DA money laundering investigations, and Homeland Security counterterrorism financing operations. At 10:17 a.m., my supervisor Jennifer Walsh knocked on my office door with an expression that immediately told me something significant had happened. Jennifer was a 20-year veteran of financial crimes investigation who had worked her way up from field agent to unit chief, and she rarely showed concern unless the situation was serious. Kevin, I need to speak with you about a flagged transaction involving your personal identity information, she said, closing the door behind her and taking a seat across from my desk. Our automated monitoring systems detected unauthorized use of your Social Security number on a bank loan application filed last Thursday. I leaned back in my chair and looked at Jennifer's concerned expression. That sounds very serious. What kind of loan application? $75,000 small business loan approved by First National Bank using your employment information, credit history and identity credentials. The application was submitted by someone named Marcus Johnson, who listed himself as your business partner. Jennifer opened a file folder and spread several documents across my desk. The system flagged it immediately because your security clearance requires monitoring of all financial activities involving your personal information. I examined the loan documents, which showed Marcus's signature next to my forged signature on multiple pages. He had used my Social Security number, employment history and financial information while listing himself as co-applicant for the business loan. The bank had approved the loan based primarily on my government employment and credit profile. Jennifer, Marcus Johnson is my older brother. I did not authorize him to use my personal information for any loan applications or business partnerships. Her expression shifted from concern to professional focus. So this is identity theft involving a federal employee with security clearance. That triggers mandatory FBI involvement and federal prosecution protocols. She gathered the documents back into her file. Kevin, I need to ask directly. Did you have any knowledge or involvement in this loan application? No knowledge or involvement whatsoever. I learned about the loan at a family barbecue on Saturday when Marcus announced it to approximately 30 relatives. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. He announced federal identity theft crimes at a family gathering? With witnesses. 28 witnesses heard him admit to using my identity information for the loan. Several family members congratulated him on his cleverness and resourcefulness. She shook her head with the expression of someone who had investigated financial crimes for 2 decades and still encountered new levels of criminal stupidity. Kevin, I need to initiate federal investigation protocols immediately. This involves identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and potential security clearance violations. FBI agents will want to interview you this afternoon. At 2:30 p.m., Special Agent Carlos Rivera from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force arrived at the Treasury building to conduct a formal interview about the identity theft. Agent Rivera was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crimes and identity theft schemes targeting federal employees. Mr. Johnson, I understand your brother used your personal information to obtain a business loan without your knowledge or authorization, Agent Rivera said as we sat in a secure conference room. Can you walk me through how you discovered this information? I provided a detailed account of Saturday's barbecue, including Marcus's public admission and the family's supportive reaction to his criminal behavior. Agent Rivera took careful notes and asked follow-up questions about specific family members who had witnessed or encouraged the identity theft. "This is somewhat unusual," Agent Rivera observed after reviewing my statement. "Most identity theft victims discover the crime through credit monitoring or financial irregularities. Your brother essentially confessed in front of multiple witnesses at a social gathering." Marcus seemed proud of his resourcefulness and assumed I would approve of his use of my information to help his business venture, I explained. The family viewed it as clever problem-solving rather than criminal behavior. Agent Rivera nodded with the expression of someone who had seen similar cases. Federal employees with security clearances are frequent targets for identity theft because of their stable employment and good credit profiles. However, they're also protected by enhanced federal monitoring systems that detect unauthorized activity quickly. He closed his notebook and looked at me directly. "Mr. Johnson, we'll be executing search warrants at your brother's residence and business locations within the next 2 hours. Given that he admitted to federal crimes in front of multiple witnesses, this investigation will proceed rapidly." At 4:23 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Kevin, what the hell is happening?" His voice was panicked and shrill. "FBI agents just surrounded my house with cars and official badges. They're saying I committed federal crimes and demanding access to my computers and financial records." I was still in my office at Treasury, finishing my daily case reports and preparing for tomorrow's briefings on cryptocurrency money laundering patterns. Through my window, I could see the federal building's flag moving in the humid afternoon breeze. "That sounds very stressful, Marcus. What exactly are the agents telling you?" "They have warrants for search and seizure. They're talking about identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and violations of federal security protocols." His voice cracked with fear and confusion. "They want to know about unauthorized use of federal employee information and potential security clearance violations." 2 FBI agents and 1 Treasury Department criminal investigator had indeed arrived at Marcus's house at 4:15 p.m. They carried federal warrants authorizing seizure of computers, financial documents, business records, and any materials related to the fraudulent loan application. Additional agents were simultaneously executing search warrants at the food truck location and First National Bank. "Marcus," I said calmly, "you admitted at the family barbecue that you used my identity information to obtain a business loan without my authorization. That constitutes federal identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. But you're my brother. I thought family helping family was different. Federal law doesn't recognize family relationships as exemptions from identity theft and fraud statutes. You committed serious federal crimes using the personal information of someone with government security clearance, which triggers enhanced penalties and mandatory prosecution." The line was quiet except for his rapid breathing and what sounded like agents speaking in the background, explaining search procedures and legal rights. "Kevin, you have to stop this. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding between brothers." "I cannot stop a federal investigation, Marcus. You committed the crimes, you admitted to the crimes in front of 28 witnesses, and federal law enforcement agencies are required to prosecute those crimes regardless of family relationships." Agent Rivera's voice could be heard in the background, reading Miranda rights and explaining federal arrest procedures. Marcus was being given the opportunity to cooperate with the investigation and answer questions about his criminal activity. "They're asking about the loan application, the forged signatures, and whether anyone else was involved in the identity theft scheme," Marcus said, his voice becoming more panicked. "What am I supposed to tell them?" "You should tell them the truth about what you did and retain qualified federal criminal defense counsel immediately," I replied in the same calm tone I used when briefing law enforcement agencies about financial crime investigations. "Lying to federal agents about crimes you've already admitted to committing will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice and false statements." At 5:47 p.m., Marcus was formally arrested and charged with aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and violations of federal security monitoring protocols. He was processed at the FBI field office and held in federal detention pending arraignment. The charges were comprehensive and serious. Aggravated identity theft involving federal employees carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years, while wire fraud and bank fraud involving amounts over $70,000 carry potential sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. The security clearance violations added additional penalties because Marcus had potentially compromised federal monitoring systems designed to protect sensitive government personnel. First National Bank faced regulatory scrutiny for their role in approving fraudulent loan applications without adequate verification of applicant identity and authorization. The bank's loan officers were required to provide testimony about their approval process and documentation review procedures. The food truck Marcus had purchased with the fraudulent loan was immediately seized as proceeds of criminal activity. The university catering contract was terminated when the contractor was arrested on federal charges, and the downtown permits were revoked due to criminal investigation of the business owner. My family's reaction was predictably supportive of Marcus and critical of my betrayal of family loyalty. Multiple relatives called to express disappointment that I had pressed charges against my own brother over what they still characterized as a family misunderstanding that should have been resolved privately. My mother was particularly upset, calling me repeatedly to demand that I fix this situation by withdrawing my complaint or speaking to my supervisors about dismissing the charges. She couldn't understand that federal identity theft crimes don't disappear because family members ask nicely, and that my position involved investigating financial crimes rather than dismissing them. At Marcus's federal arraignment 3 weeks later, he appeared in federal court wearing a detention jumpsuit, looking pale and exhausted from his time in federal holding. His court-appointed federal defender advised him to plead guilty and cooperate fully with the investigation to minimize his sentence under federal guidelines. Federal prosecutors presented evidence including Marcus's recorded admissions at the family barbecue, testimony from 28 witnesses who heard him confess to identity theft, financial records showing the detailed fraudulent loan application, and expert testimony from Treasury Department officials explaining federal monitoring systems and security protocols. The federal judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of identity theft charges involving federal employee information and the potential for additional criminal activity if Marcus was released. He would remain in federal detention until sentencing, which was scheduled for 6 weeks later. During the pre-sentencing investigation, federal probation officers discovered that Marcus had previously used other family members' credit card information for personal purchases, suggesting a pattern of identity theft within the family. He had also submitted fraudulent employment verification documents for previous loan applications, indicating systematic financial fraud rather than isolated poor judgment. The additional evidence eliminated any possibility of reduced charges or lenient sentencing. Federal guidelines for aggravated identity theft involving security clearance violations require enhanced penalties to protect federal monitoring systems and sensitive government operations. 6 weeks later, Marcus was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years supervised probation. The judge ordered restitution of $95,000 to cover the fraudulent loan amount, federal investigation costs, bank regulatory penalties, and administrative expenses for security protocol reviews. Federal prosecutors explained during sentencing that crimes involving federal employee identity information carry enhanced penalties because they potentially compromise national security systems designed to protect sensitive government personnel and operations. Marcus's actions had triggered expensive security reviews and enhanced monitoring procedures that cost taxpayers significant resources. The federal judge noted that Marcus's public admission of his crimes at a family gathering, witnessed by nearly 30 people, demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the seriousness of federal financial crimes and identity theft violations. My employment at FinCEN was unaffected by Marcus's crimes, though my security clearance was reviewed and my personal financial monitoring was enhanced as a precautionary measure. Federal security officials conducted comprehensive background reinvestigations to ensure that Marcus's criminal activity hadn't compromised any sensitive information or operations. The family barbecue tradition was quietly discontinued after several relatives received federal subpoenas as material witnesses in criminal proceedings. Uncle Steve, Aunt Carol, and 6 cousins were required to provide sworn testimony about Marcus's admissions and the family's reaction to his criminal behavior. Several family members faced their own scrutiny when background investigators discovered that other relatives had also used each other's credit card information or personal details for various transactions. What had seemed like casual family cooperation was revealed to be a pattern of identity theft and financial fraud spanning several years. I still work at FinCEN analyzing financial crime patterns and coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies. I still drive my modest Honda Civic and live in my monitored downtown condo. I still maintain the quiet lifestyle required for someone with access to sensitive financial intelligence. The difference is that family gatherings are now much smaller and more subdued. Marcus won't be eligible for release until he serves his full federal sentence, and several relatives avoid me because they associate me with causing his imprisonment rather than investigating the crimes he chose to commit. My parents occasionally ask when I'll forgive Marcus and help with his commissary expenses in federal prison. I explain that federal identity theft convictions carry serious long-term consequences, including permanent restrictions on his ability to obtain credit, employment in financial services, or business licenses. They still don't understand that my security clearance prohibits me from providing financial assistance to family members convicted of federal crimes, particularly those involving identity theft and financial fraud. Any such assistance would jeopardize my career and potentially result in my own criminal charges. Last month I received a letter from Marcus at the Federal Correctional Institution where he's serving his sentence. He wrote that he finally understands the seriousness of identity theft and federal financial crimes, but he's struggling to comprehend why borrowing his brother's information resulted in federal prison rather than family cooperation. He asked why I never warned him about the potential legal consequences of using someone else's identity information for loan applications, especially when that someone works for federal financial crimes investigation. I haven't responded to the letter. Federal employees are discouraged from maintaining correspondence with family members convicted of financial crimes, and my security clearance requires disclosure of all contact with individuals who have committed crimes involving federal systems or personnel. The annual family barbecue was replaced with smaller gatherings that I generally don't attend. When I do interact with family members, they're much more careful about discussing their financial activities, business ventures, and any suggestions involving shared resources or information. Some lessons about federal law and personal responsibility can only be learned through direct experience with the federal justice system. Marcus is receiving excellent education in the long-term consequences of identity theft, wire fraud, and violations of federal security protocols. The food truck business never opened. The fraudulent loan was added to federal databases as evidence of systematic financial crimes. My identity information remains under enhanced federal monitoring, exactly where it belongs for someone with access to sensitive financial intelligence systems.
Get out. You're not welcome in this house anymore. My mother-in-law Helen's voice echoed through the mansion's marble foyer. Her face was twisted with rage as she threw my belongings onto the perfectly manicured lawn. Behind her, my husband David stood with his arm wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before, both of them wearing matching smirks. My name is Anna, and at 32, I was watching my decade-long marriage crumble on my in-laws' front lawn. But unlike what they expected, I wasn't crying or begging. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm as I watched Helen's performance. "You ungrateful witch." Helen continued her tirade. "How dare you accuse my David of trying to steal your money? He deserves that inheritance more than you ever did." I almost laughed at the irony. Just hours earlier, I discovered their elaborate plan to transfer my inheritance, the money my grandmother had left me, into an account they controlled. The account was conveniently registered under the name of Jessica, the woman now clutching my husband's arm. "Mom, don't waste your breath," David said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's always been paranoid about her precious inheritance. That's why we had to be creative." Creative. That's what he called secretly meeting with lawyers to forge my signature. Creative was how he described planning to marry his mistress without divorcing me first, just to keep me from claiming my share of our marital assets. I calmly picked up my bag from the grass. "You're right, Helen. I should leave." My composed response clearly threw them off balance. They had expected tears, drama, perhaps even a scene they could use against me later. "That's it." Jessica spoke up for the first time, her young face confused. "You're just going to leave." I smiled, remembering the USB drive safely tucked in my pocket. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. 3 hours earlier, I had arrived at the mansion for our weekly family dinner. Everything seemed normal. Helen fussing over David as usual, my father-in-law George buried in his newspaper. But when I went to use Helen's computer to print some documents for work, I found something interesting. Emails between her, David, and a lawyer discussing how to transfer Anna's assets without her knowledge. The plan was elaborate. They had been gathering my personal information for months, practicing my signature, even had a notary on their payroll. The final step was to have me sign what I thought would be renovation papers for our house, but would actually be documents transferring my inheritance to Jessica. What they didn't know was that I'd suspected something was wrong for weeks. David's sudden interest in my grandmother's inheritance, his mysterious phone calls, Helen's unusual questions about my bank accounts, it all added up to something suspicious. So I'd taken precautions. Hidden cameras in our house caught David's late-night meetings with Jessica and his mother, where they planned everything in detail. My phone recorded every conversation where Helen casually asked about my financial arrangements, and most importantly, I'd already moved my inheritance into a trust that only I could access. "You think you're so clever," Helen spat as I walked toward my car. "But you're nothing without this family. Nothing." I turned back one last time. "We'll see about that, Helen. Give me 3 months. Just 3 months." David laughed. "3 months for what? To beg for forgiveness?" "No," I replied, starting my car. 3 months for you to realize exactly what you've lost." As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror. Helen gesturing wildly, David holding Jessica, all of them probably congratulating themselves on getting rid of me so easily. They had no idea what was coming. I drove straight to my best friend Olivia's house. She opened the door before I could even knock, worry etched on her face. "Did you get what you needed?" I pulled out the USB drive. Everything. Every email, every forged document, every conversation about their little plan. I collapsed onto her couch, finally letting the events of the day sink in. They didn't even try to deny it, Liv. They were proud of their scheme. Olivia sat beside me, her lawyer instincts already kicking in. "Then they've handed us everything we need. The recordings, the emails, the witnesses, it's all admissible in court." I nodded, thinking about the next steps. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, securing my assets, gathering evidence, building a case that would be impossible to defend against. But watching David stand there with his mistress, seeing Helen's true colors on full display, it still hurt more than I expected. "You know what the funny part is?" I said, accepting the glass of wine Olivia offered. "They think they've won. They actually believe I walked away because I'm weak." Olivia smiled, a fierce protective glint in her eye. "Then they clearly never knew the real you. So what's the plan?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. First, we call Robert Harrison, the federal investigator who's been waiting for evidence of Helen's financial fraud. Then, we let the dominoes fall exactly where I've lined them up. And David, Jessica? I smiled, thinking about the paper trail I discovered linking them to Helen's broader scheme. They chose their side. Now they get to go down with the ship. As night fell, I sat in Olivia's guest room, looking through old photos on my phone. 10 years of marriage reduced to evidence in a fraud case. But as I closed the photo album and opened my email to contact Investigator Harrison, I felt stronger than I had in years. They thought they were destroying me. Instead, they had freed me to take them all down. Let them enjoy their victory for now. In 3 months, they'd learn exactly who they were dealing with. The first signs that something was wrong appeared exactly 2 weeks after I left. I was having coffee with Olivia when my phone buzzed with a text from my father-in-law George. "Anna, we need to talk. Something's not right with the company accounts." I showed the message to Olivia, who raised an eyebrow. Right on schedule. What George had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. For years, Helen had been using the family's real estate company to run a sophisticated fraud scheme. My evidence didn't just prove their plan to steal my inheritance, it revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that went back decades. I texted back a simple response. "Ask Helen of the Riverside Properties deal." Within minutes, my phone was flooded with calls. First from George, then Helen, and finally David. I ignored them all, knowing exactly what they found. The Riverside Properties transaction was Helen's biggest mistake, and the documentation I'd gathered proved she'd embezzled nearly $2 million through fake renovation contracts. Your mother-in-law's been busy, Investigator Harrison said during our meeting that afternoon. He spread the documents across his desk, each page revealing another layer of fraud. And your husband was actively helping her cover it up. I nodded, watching as he added my evidence to his growing file. They got careless. When they started planning to steal my inheritance, they left their other records vulnerable. Mrs. Collins, Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. This is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Helen's screaming face, David's smirk, Jessica's confused expression. They made it ugly when they planned to steal everything I had. The next day, federal agents arrived at Helen's office. I wasn't there to see it, but Olivia's colleague who worked in the same building described how Helen was escorted out, still shouting that it was all a misunderstanding. David called me that evening, his voice no longer smug. What did you do? He demanded. Mom's been arrested. I didn't do anything, David. The federal investigation into Helen's fraud has been ongoing for months. I just stopped helping hide it. You're lying. You set this up. I could hear Jessica in the background, asking what was happening. No, David. Your mother set this up when she decided to steal from her own company. You set this up when you helped her hide it. I just stopped being complicit. The silence on his end was deafening. Oh, and David, I added, you might want to check those documents you signed last month. The ones about the renovation project. They've been submitted to the investigation. He hung up without another word. Over the next few weeks, the truth about Helen's schemes unraveled spectacularly. The local papers ran stories about the prominent real estate family's fall from grace. Former employees came forward with their own evidence of fraud. Even George, once he realized the extent of his wife's deception, began cooperating with investigators. Jessica disappeared first, leaving David with nothing but a text message. This isn't what I signed up for. Apparently, the promise of my inheritance wasn't worth facing federal fraud charges. I watched it all unfold from a safe distance, focusing on rebuilding my life. Olivia helped me find a new apartment, and I threw myself into my work, letting the investigators handle the rest. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Collins? Investigator Harrison's voice was triumphant. We've frozen all their accounts. The evidence you provided led us to 6 other fraud schemes. They're looking at serious prison time. I sat down, feeling the weight of the past month lift from my shoulders. And David? Your husband's been charged as an accomplice. We found his fingerprints all over the fake documents. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. That evening, as I sat on my new balcony watching the sunset, my phone lit up with a message from Helen. Even under house arrest, she couldn't help trying to have the last word. You've destroyed this family, she wrote. I hope you're happy. I thought about responding, about pointing out that she had destroyed her own family with her greed and manipulation. Instead, I simply blocked her number. 2 months had passed since that day on the lawn. 2 months of watching karma deliver exactly what they deserved. But sitting there, looking at the city lights, I realized I didn't feel victorious. I felt peaceful. They had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, they had given me something invaluable. Freedom from their toxicity and the strength to stand up for myself. As I reached for my wine glass, my phone buzzed one last time. It was George. Anna, his message read, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I looked at those words for a long time, thinking about how different things might have been if he'd stopped Helen years ago. But the past was the past. The future, however, was looking surprisingly bright. 1 month left in my promised 3 months, and already their perfect little world had crumbled. But the final piece of my plan was still to come, and for that, I needed to make just one more phone call. Hello, I said when the line connected. This is Anna Collins. I'd like to schedule a meeting about purchasing Riverside properties. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same property that had exposed Helen's fraud would now become the foundation of my new beginning. Let them think they'd won that day on the lawn. Their victory had lasted exactly 2 weeks. My victory? That would last a lifetime. The 3-month mark arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I stood outside the courthouse, adjusting my blazer as reporters gathered on the steps. Today was Helen's sentencing hearing, and the media was eager to cover the downfall of one of the city's most prominent families. Ready for this? Olivia asked, standing beside me with her briefcase. I nodded, watching David and his father arrive separately. David looked nothing like the smug man who'd stood with his mistress 3 months ago. His designer suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting department store number. His confidence struck now a defeated shuffle. The hearing proceeded exactly as expected. Helen, despite her tearful pleas for leniency, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge was particularly harsh given her attempts to frame others for her crimes, including a last-ditch effort to claim I had orchestrated everything. Mrs. Harrison Collins, the judge addressed me directly after announcing the sentence. The court acknowledges your cooperation in exposing this fraud. Your inheritance will remain protected under the trust you established. I caught Helen's venomous glare from the defendant's table. This wasn't how she'd imagined things playing out when she'd thrown my belongings onto her lawn. David was sentenced next, 5 years for his role in the fraud scheme. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. I never thought you'd fight back, he said quietly. That was your first mistake, I replied. Outside the courthouse, George approached me. He'd aged years in just 3 months, the stress of everything etching deep lines in his face. Anna, I know it doesn't mean much now, but I truly am sorry. I studied the man who'd stood silently by while his wife and son plotted to steal everything from me. You're right, George. It doesn't mean much now, but maybe someday it will. Later that afternoon, I had one final meeting, the closing on Riverside Properties. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when I submitted the winning bid for the property that had exposed Helen's fraud. I planned to transform it into affordable housing for domestic abuse survivors, a project that would erase Helen's toxic legacy and create something meaningful in its place. Quite a 3 months, Olivia remarked as we celebrated that evening. You said they'd regret it, but I don't think even you expected all this. I swirled my wine, thinking about everything that had transpired. They thought they were punishing me that day, throwing me out like I was nothing. But they gave me exactly what I needed, the push to stop protecting them from themselves. The local paper ran one final story about the case the next day. The headline read, Family Fraud Scheme Exposed. Justice Prevails. Below it was a quote from investigator Harrison. Sometimes the people we think are victims turn out to be the strongest among us. I kept a copy of that paper, not as a reminder of their betrayal, but of my own strength. 3 months had changed everything, but the biggest change was in me. I was no longer the woman they thought they could discard. I was someone stronger, someone who fought back. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica. I should have known better. I'm sorry. I deleted the message without responding. Her apology, like Helen's schemes and David's betrayal, belonged in the past. My future was ahead of me, and for the first time in years, I was actually excited to see what it held. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment that evening, I raised a glass to myself. Here's to 3 months, I whispered to the city lights, and to all the years ahead. They had tried to write my ending that day on the lawn. Instead, they had only written their own. My story? It was just beginning. The final papers arrived a week later. My divorce was official, Helen's assets were forfeit, and Riverside Properties was mine. As I signed the last document, I remembered Helen's words, You're nothing without this family. She was right about one thing. I was nothing like their family, and that had turned out to be my greatest strength. Pack your bags and get out. This house belongs to my son's new love now. My mother-in-law Eleanor's voice echoed through the 2-story house as she threw my clothes down the stairs. I watched calmly as my favorite blue sweater landed at my feet, followed by the rest of my wardrobe. My name is Olivia Parker, and at 34, I was watching my marriage crumble while my mother-in-law gleefully sided with my husband's 23-year-old girlfriend. But unlike what they expected, I wasn't crying or begging. Instead, I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over the recording app. These recordings will interest your church group, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. Eleanor froze mid-throw, one of my dresses dangling from her manicured hands. What recordings? She snapped, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice. She knew exactly what I meant. For the past year, I've been documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every scheme she plotted against me. Eleanor Thompson, the respected church leader and perfect mother, had quite a different personality behind closed doors. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, descending the stairs with what she probably thought was menacing grace. No one would believe you over me. I smiled, remembering all the times she used her reputation to shield herself from consequences. Want to bet? I have quite a collection. Like last Easter, when you told the pastor's wife I couldn't attend the charity event because I was unstable. while actually locking me in the guest room. Her face paled slightly. That's not. I was protecting you. Or maybe, I continued, scrolling through my phone, they'd be interested in hearing how you sabotaged my birth control because you wanted grandchildren, then called me defective when I had a miscarriage. That had been 6 months ago. The pain was still fresh, but I learned to channel it into something stronger than grief. Each recording, each documented incident had become my armor against her cruelty. You're just upset about Michael. Eleanor recovered quickly, straightening her designer blouse. He's found someone more suitable, someone who can give him a family. Ashley is young, fertile, and half his age. I cut in. Does your church group know you're supporting your son's affair with a girl barely out of college? The look on her face was almost worth the past year of hell. Almost. You ungrateful little, she started, but I held up my phone again. Careful, Eleanor. I'm still recording. She glanced at my phone, then at the stairs still littered with my clothes. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, calculating her next move. Eleanor had always been good at strategy. It's how she'd maintained her pristine reputation while systematically destroying mine. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice tight. I picked up my blue sweater, brushing it off carefully. I want what's fair. Half of everything Michael and I built together. The house, the savings, everything. Absolutely not. Eleanor's face reddened. This house has been in our family for generations. I only let Michael add your name to the deed because you never thought he'd get caught cheating. I finished for her. Or because you never thought I'd stand up to you. The truth was, I'd spent years trying to please Eleanor, thinking if I just tried hard enough, she'd accept me. I'd attended every church function, volunteered at every charity event, ignored every subtle dig about my common background. But nothing was ever enough. I have videos too, I added, watching her eyes widen, of you and Michael plotting how to force me out, planning how to hide assets so I'd leave with nothing. The timestamps match your Sunday school meetings perfectly. Eleanor sank onto the bottom stair, her perfectly maintained facade cracking slightly. You've been planning this. No, Eleanor. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. I started gathering my clothes, folding each piece carefully. The house was quiet now, save for the tick of the antique grandfather clock Eleanor had given us as a wedding present. To remind you of the passing time, she'd said then. I thought she meant our happy years together. Now I wondered if she'd been counting down to this moment all along. If those recordings get out, she began. You'll lose everything, I finished. Your reputation, your position in the church, maybe even your precious social standing. Imagine what people would say about the woman who helped her son abandon his wife for a college girl. Eleanor stood up suddenly, smoothing her clothes with trembling hands. I'll talk to Michael. We can arrange something. I nodded, keeping my face neutral despite the victory thrumming in my chest. That would be wise. And Eleanor? I waited until she looked at me. Next time you want to throw someone out of their own house, make sure they don't have receipts. She hurried up the stairs, probably to make frantic calls to Michael. I continued folding my clothes, each movement deliberate and calm. The recordings had been my insurance policy, my way of making sure I wouldn't end up like Michael's first girlfriend, the one Eleanor had driven away with similar tactics before she could trap her son. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom says you're being difficult. Just leave. It'll be easier for everyone. I smiled, thinking of the evidence safely backed up in multiple places. Easier for whom? I typed back. We should talk. Your mom can explain why. The message showed as read, but no reply came. That was fine. I had time, and more importantly, I had proof. Eleanor could throw my clothes down the stairs, but she couldn't throw away the truth I collected, one recording at a time. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, 12 from Michael, 5 from Eleanor. I ignored them all and made my morning coffee, enjoying the quiet of my best friend Amanda's guest room where I'd spent the night. You recorded everything? Amanda asked, sliding into the chair across from me. She'd been horrified but not surprised when I played her some of the recordings last night. Every nasty comment, every scheme. I nodded, pulling up a folder on my phone. Started right after the miscarriage. Something in Eleanor's eyes that day. I knew she was planning something. I just didn't know what. The memory of that day still stung. I'd been in the hospital, barely processing my loss, when Eleanor had swept in with her designer handbag and perfectly practiced sympathy. Perhaps this is God's way of saying you're not meant to be a mother, she'd said, patting my hand. Michael needs someone who can carry on the family name. I'd started recording the next day. My phone buzzed again. Michael. This time I answered. We need to talk, he said, his voice tense. Mom's hysterical. What did you say to her? Just the truth, I replied calmly. About the recordings, the videos, everything. There was a long pause. What recordings? I played him a short clip, him and Eleanor in the kitchen 3 months ago, discussing how to transfer money from our joint account without my knowledge. His sharp intake of breath told me he recognized the conversation. Olivia, he started, but I cut him off. I'm done being the villain in your mother's story, Michael. I want a fair divorce settlement. Half of everything we built together. Otherwise, these recordings go public. You're blackmailing us? His voice rose with indignation. No, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Meet me at Carson's Cafe at noon. Bring your mother. We'll discuss terms. I hung up before he could argue. Amanda gave me a worried look. Are you sure about this? Eleanor's dangerous when she's cornered. So am I replied, but my hands shook slightly as I set down my coffee cup. Carson's Cafe was busy when I arrived, exactly as I planned. Eleanor would be less likely to make a scene with witnesses around. I chose a table in the center of the room and waited. They arrived together, Michael looking uncomfortable in his rumpled suit, Eleanor pristine as always in her church clothes. Of course she'd come straight from Sunday service. Her reputation to maintain. This is unnecessary, Eleanor started as soon as they sat down. We can discuss this privately. No, I said firmly. We discuss it here. Now. I pulled out my phone and several printed documents. I want half of everything. The house, the savings, the investments. Everything we built during our marriage. That's ridiculous, Michael snapped. You can't prove. I played another recording. Eleanor coaching him on how to hide assets, discussing Ashley's role in their plan. Several nearby diners turned to look at us. Eleanor's face tightened. Turn that off, she hissed. Happy to, I said, stopping the playback. Once you agree to my terms. Michael looked between us, his confidence wavering. The house belongs to my family. Check the deed, I interrupted. My name's on it. Eleanor made sure of that when she thought I was her perfect daughter-in-law. Eleanor's perfectly manicured nails dug into the table's surface. You ungrateful little. Careful, I warned. We're in public. I gestured to my phone, and still recording. The waitress arrived with menus. We all declined to order. What do you really want? Michael finally asked. I told you. Half of everything. A clean break. No contests, no games, no more of Eleanor's schemes. And the recordings? Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. Stay private as long as you both behave. Think of it as insurance. Michael started to argue, but Eleanor grabbed his arm. She knew she was beaten. Her perfectly crafted image couldn't survive those recordings becoming public. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll have the lawyers draw up papers. I smiled, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Perfect. I'll expect them by Friday. And Eleanor. I waited until she met my eyes. Next time you try to destroy someone, make sure they're not smarter than you. As I stood to leave, Michael grabbed my wrist. Why did you record everything? Did you never trust me? I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I've fallen in love with was gone, replaced by his mother's puppet. No, I said honestly, I trusted you completely. That was my mistake, but I learned from it. I walked out of Carson's Cafe with my head high, leaving them to deal with the curious stares from other diners. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. How did it go? They agreed, I wrote back. Amazing what a little evidence can do. Eleanor and Michael had thought they could bully me into leaving with nothing. They've forgotten that sometimes the quietest people are the ones you should fear most. I'd been quiet for years, watching, waiting, documenting. Now they knew why. A month after our confrontation at Carson's Cafe, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and fresh possibilities. The divorce settlement had been finalized faster than expected. Eleanor's fear of those recordings had apparently outweighed her desire to drag things out. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. Church newsletter just came out. You might want to see this. She attached a photo of the latest church bulletin. There, in Eleanor's monthly column, was a carefully worded announcement about Michael and Ashley's relationship. painting it as a beautiful story of two souls finding each other after his amicable divorce. No mention of the affair, of course. I laughed, remembering Eleanor's face when my lawyer had played the recordings during our final settlement meeting. Her precious reputation had survived, but we all knew the truth. Still spreading her version of events, I texted back to Amanda. "Want me to send the recordings to the pastor?" she replied. "No need. Let her have her story. I got what matters." And I had. Half of everything, including the house which I promptly sold. Michael and Ashley could live with Eleanor for all I cared. I had my freedom and enough money to start fresh. The doorbell rang, interrupting my unpacking. It was Eleanor, standing there in her Sunday best, looking uncomfortable. "May I come in?" she asked stiffly. I considered closing the door in her face, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes. She stepped inside, eyeing my half-unpacked boxes. "This is nice. What do you want, Eleanor?" She twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. "The recordings. Now that everything's settled, I want them destroyed." I leaned against the wall, studying her, afraid they might leak. "They've served their purpose," she said. "You got what you wanted." "No, Eleanor. I got what I deserved." "There's a difference." She flinched slightly. "Michael and Ashley are getting married next month. And you're here because you're worried I'll send the recordings to the guest list. Wouldn't you? After everything." I walked to my desk and pulled out a USB drive. "Here, the originals." Her eyes widened as I held it out. "Just like that." "Just like that. But Eleanor?" I waited until she met my gaze. "I kept copies. Consider it a reminder to treat your next daughter-in-law better." She clutched the USB drive, her knuckles white. "You've changed." "No," I corrected her. "I just stopped letting you change me." After she left, I finished unpacking my living room, arranging photos of my new life. Trips with Amanda, my new job offer, the small garden I'd started on my balcony. No sign of my old life with Michael, no trace of Eleanor's influence. My phone buzzed again. A message from Michael. "Mom says you gave her the recordings." "Thank you." I typed back. "I gave her what she wanted. Just like you did." Then I blocked his number. Later that evening, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, I scrolled through my phone's gallery. Among the new photos were the folders of recordings, my insurance policy against Eleanor's future schemes. She had her USB drive, but I had backups. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Amanda came over with takeout, a bottle of wine, and news about Eleanor's latest church committee drama. We laughed about it now, the power she once held over me reduced to amusing gossip. "You know," Amanda said, raising her glass, "I never thought you'd outmaneuver Eleanor. She always seemed unbeatable." I smiled, thinking of all the quiet moments I'd spent building my case, recording every manipulation, every scheme. She taught me something important, actually. "What's that?" Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting smart. My phone buzzed one last time, a final email from Eleanor. "I hope you understand why I did what I did. I was protecting my son." I didn't reply. She'd gotten her USB drive, her pristine reputation, and her son's new marriage to celebrate. I'd gotten my freedom, my dignity, and the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere in her perfect world, Eleanor would always remember the quiet daughter-in-law who'd outsmarted her at her own game. And that was worth more than any recording.